Hello, and welcome to the Dollars and Donuts continuing series on tax revenue and economic conditions. My name is Eric Richardson, Fiscal Analyst for the Legislative Services Agency. This graph looks at overall state and local tax revenue over a period of years. Notice the net state taxes includes all forms, including non-general fund taxes, and that is in blue. There has been a gradual increase over the last few years that has grown more the last 3 fiscal years, partially due to federal transfer payments to individuals that have increased household wealth. This is a pie graph looking at fiscal year 2023 state and local tax revenue. The highest amounts are for local property taxes at 34.5%. Individual income tax at 23.9%, and sales and use tax to the state at 20.3%. Local option sales taxes are at 7.7% of state revenue in fiscal year 2023. This looks at state and local tax growth in millions of dollars. The state portion is in blue. The green line represents state and local total per fiscal year. You can see a dip in 2020 for state taxes, and that was due to filing deadlines pushed to the summer during the pandemic. The outliers are the extremely large gains in cash fiscal years 2021 and 2022, with gains of over $1.4 billion in each year, and that is not likely to happen again in the near future. Fiscal year 2023 saw a decrease in overall state tax growth, offset by growth in local taxes. This slide looks at the Revenue Estimating Conference, which was held on December 13th. Fiscal year 2023 finished with a $42 million increase, or 0.4% compared to fiscal year 2022. Net receipts in estimated fiscal year 2024 are forecasted to decrease by $99 million, or negative 1%, and decrease another $109 million, or negative 1.1% in fiscal year 2025 from fiscal year 2024's forecasted amount. This will be updated in March. This slide looks at general fund revenue history on an annual basis, compiled monthly. You can see a peak around the start of calendar year 2023, which has since dropped then due to tax cuts from House File 2317. General fund revenue has also started to stabilize in recent months. This slide looks at net general fund revenue by revenue type on an annual basis, computed monthly. Income tax in blue has decreased significantly, while sales tax in orange has continued to increase. Corporate tax revenue in black has gained the last few years, but has fallen the last couple of months after October's all-time high. Other taxes in yellow have shown volatility in recent months due to accounting procedures, along with the introduction of the composite tax and pass-through entity tax that are now included in this category. Other revenue has slowly increased in recent years after being relatively flat in prior decades. This slide isolates income tax on an annual basis in Iowa, computed monthly. You can see the peak at $5.1 billion in December 2022, and over the last year, annual revenue has dropped to $4.1 billion as of December 2023. 2022 Iowa Acts House File 2317 introduced individual income tax cuts beginning January 1st, 2023, and phased in through tax year 2026. This graph isolates sales and use tax in Iowa from 1994 to today. You can see a dip in 2008 due to the financial crisis and a new baseline level that's represented by the red arrow. After the 2020 pandemic, the baseline increased again due to federal transfer payments to individuals. And in the last year, sales and use tax revenue has increased by $313 million. The question that we are looking at is whether the new baseline represents a baseline that will stay at the pre-financial crisis baseline or will revert back to the baseline during the 2010s. This graph isolates corporate tax revenue from 1994 to today. Generally, corporate tax revenue has increased since the pandemic. However, there has been more volatility the last 2 years. Revenue in October 2023 was the highest annual revenue amount ever recorded at $993 million, followed by 2 months of revenue decreases to $867 million. The corporate tax rate decreased to 7.1% beginning January 1st from 8.4%, and is scheduled to be reduced to 5.5% due to House File 2317. This shows state tax revenue source distribution from November 2022 to November 2023. Income tax is down from 43.8% to 39%. Sales and use tax is up from 33.6% to 35.5%. Other taxes increased from 1.4% to 3.3%. And corporate banking and insurance premium taxes also increased by 1.2% over the last year. Moving on to the economic outlook portion of the presentation. This bar graph displays the change in U.S. population since 1940. Overall, there has been a downward trend in population growth in the country, especially beginning in the late 1960s, which affects a lot of what public officials are concerned about, including workforce challenges and demographic trends that affect the tax base, plus healthcare concerns. This graph illustrates U.S. employment over the course of decades. Notice the overall trends have shifted flatter, with the red trend line remaining relatively constant through 2000, while the flatter green trend line since 2000 illustrates lower growth in the amount of jobs in the last 20 years. Demographic and population challenges may partially be the cause of lower growth in employment in the country, which also filters down to Iowa. Technology and globalization could also be factors. In Iowa, non-farm employment has also flattened since 2000, with lower growth trends represented by the green arrow. This year, the state once again reached pre-pandemic employment levels of approximately 1.6 million jobs, although that has fallen slightly. This graph compares Iowa and U.S. payroll employment percentage growth since 1991. Iowa is in orange and the U.S. is in blue. Generally, these two metrics have paralleled, with Iowa's trends not as volatile compared to national trends. Job growth for both have decreased in the last couple of years due to labor force concerns. This graph looks at Iowa unemployment insurance benefits, first payments in blue and final payments in red. Notice of the massive upswing in benefits paid during the pandemic and after prior recessions. Even with a recent increase in unemployment benefits paid during 2023, payments still track far below baselines over the prior decades. In 2022, first payments hit a low not seen since the 1970s. This chart shows Iowa employment changes since the pre-recession peak in February 2020. Overall employment for the 12 months ending October 2023 decreased 2,900 jobs, with notable decreases in the financial activities, leisure and hospitality, and information sectors. Notable increases during the past 3 years were in the construction, education, and health and services, and manufacturing sectors. This is a graph illustrating the relationship between the federal funds rate in green, CPI in purple, and percent increase in U.S. employment in light blue. For the most part, the three have moved in tandem the last 25 years. From 2009 to 2015, the federal funds rate in green was near 0%. This is likely not going to happen again anytime soon. When the federal funds rate is lowered, there's likely to be a baseline between 2 and 3%. CPI has been falling since the 9.1% high in 2022 and is now at 3.4% as of December 2023. On the right side here, you can see the federal funds rate in green lagging both CPI and employment, which points to rate reductions in the near future, as publicized by the Federal Reserve Board last month. When rates are lowered, this should help the housing and manufacturing sectors, which have seen relatively high borrowing costs the last 2 years. Here is Iowa wage and salary growth, which was high coming out of the pandemic, but has decreased to below 3% in the state as of the third quarter of 2023, closer to baseline levels. Since new jobs and job changes tend to increase wages, this measure should stabilize as job quits have decreased in prior months and turnover decreases. This is U.S. median wage growth as a 3-month tracker published by the Atlanta Federal Reserve. Relative growth throughout the 2010s was followed by the large increases in 2022 and a subsequent decrease over the last year. This measure has remained at 5.2% each of the last 4 months. It will be interesting to see if wage growth stays elevated compared to levels during the 2010s or decreases back to pre-pandemic levels. This graph shows U.S. crude oil production by barrels per day. In October, production reached 13.2 million barrels per day, which is higher than Saudi Arabia. This production, along with increased U.S. natural gas production, shows relative energy independence is possible, although the U.S. exports quite a bit. Low gas prices this year may increase consumer confidence and buttress consumer spending, even with lower savings balances and savings rates. Saudi Arabia could decide to flood the market, which they did in 2014 to hurt American and other producers, which would keep prices low. There are fewer rigs up than in the past in the US, although they are more efficient. Lower prices could prevent new infrastructure from coming online. Conversely, Middle Eastern instability could increase gas prices this year. This graph shows Iowa housing permits on an annual basis. This decreased significantly since 2021 as inflation increased the price of materials and higher interest rates increased borrowing costs. However, there has been an increase with October and November's measure for single-family units going from 6,700 to about 7,200. The prospect of both reduced inflation and lower borrowing costs may create the conditions for an upswing in permits in the next few years, especially with extraordinary demand for housing. This graph shows the U.S. government debt on the left side in red annually, which is the deficit, and the total federal debt on the right side in blue. The total debt hit $34 trillion recently, and there's no prospect of any major decrease in the deficit in the near term. Lastly, here is federal debt as a percentage of GDP. This jumped during the pandemic and is now baseline near 120% of GDP. Interest costs are expected to move from 2.5% to 3.5% of GDP in 2024 and poses long-term budget concerns. This could affect Iowa as high federal debt makes it more difficult for the federal government to make transfer payments to states. You can see links here for our publications, some of which are represented in this presentation, and my contact information is below. Feel free to contact me at any time. Thank you very much.